We are beautifully, melanated.
Welcome to the Beautifully Melanated podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sarah, and I'm back with my two lovely co-hosts.
I'm Kay.
Hi, and I'm Karen. And today we're going to be talking about church, or our experiences of the church. So I'm going to kick off tonight, ladies, and say that when I was very young, I went to Sunday school. So my parents were not particularly religious themselves. My mum was a believer, but they didn't visit church themselves. So I went to Sunday school. I had a great time. I made lots of friends. And I just enjoyed the experience. I think because it was Sunday school, so I didn't have to sit through the main service. I think that was what I really liked because I was around other children my age. And I think it really helped shape me in the sense that for me, it taught morals and it made me believe that there is a greater, higher power who is loving, all-powerful, and is looking after me. I guess the flip side with that is that it also talked about hell. And if you didn't give your life to Christ, what would happen? I remember being terrified of dying as a young person. And I guess that's the whole point, isn't it? Because they have to, I guess Christians believe that they need to spread the gospel. You need to repent in order to save yourself from eternal damnation. They believe in, repenting of your sins. And I do get it. That's the sort of main doctrine, isn't it? However, I just remember that being really just something that stayed with me. It was very, very difficult as a child to kind of understand that on a deeper level. And, why would, how could that happen to someone? Why would God allow someone to be damned to hell? But then I guess the point, like I say, is so that you do repent, so that you do give your life to Christ, and therefore that won't happen to you. But on the whole, I would say it shaped my life. I am still a believer. I don't attend church regularly anymore, but I did for many, many years. My children attended Sunday school. So for me, the church has been a very positive institution in my life. But I do think people's experiences will differ depending on their experience of, where they went, the denomination they join, the people, their congregation will make an impact. And so I've heard people say, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in the church. And that's fine. I have friends who are atheists and things like that. But I think when people have had a poor example or poor experience of church, I think that I would say not to look at religion as a whole, but look at why you've come to that decision and what happened for you, why you've made that decision. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
So, Karen,
yes.
That last point you made about looking at religion, I think I'm the opposite of you. I see religion first, church second, churches where religion is practiced. So for me, it's the theology that I have major issues with. But I will start with the positives of what I liked about church.
Okay.
I still love hymns. I like the organ. I like the music. I like the singing. And when I was growing up, it was very much a social club because that was the only social outlet. It was school, home, church. So it's a massive part of my life. And I love the social side of it. I love the music. The theology I've always battled with. Christianity has never quite fully made sense to me. And I tried. I was in it for 31 years. I really did try. And I've been to several different denominations. So the one I grew up in, which is a cult, and I won't name it. And then I went to a non-denominational church. Then I went to a cafe-style church. Then I went to an African church, and eventually left because I realized I was trying to make myself fit into religion, into a mold that just didn't fit. Recently went back to church for my brother's funeral. That was interesting. And it's the church I grew up in. So there was lots of memories that came flooding back. But my daughter was with me and she was like, what is this? Why are they shouting? Why is the minister shouting? And it seemed so theatrical from the outside looking in. We still loved the music, but the preaching was, very fear-based, very much the whole hellfire and brimstone if you're not a Christian. It was obvious from how we were dressed, from our jewelry to sleeveless tops to tattoos, that we were no longer in church. And so one of the preachers, two of them thought it was a good time to say, I won't see my brother again. We won't see your brother, if we don't come back to church. And that is their belief, that if you don't come back to this way of living and being, then you're lost. Therefore, you won't see your loved one again. And looking through her eyes, hearing it, it just sounded like absolute nonsense, which it is. But I believed it growing up, and I was terrified of God. I mean, the fear in me of him watching everything I did, waiting to punish me if I did anything wrong. I didn't get the love aspect of who God is. It was fear and anxiety. And the theology starts from, you're born in sin. Even that phrasing, you're born in sin, therefore you're worthless and you're nothing without Jesus. And Jesus is white and I'm black and I can't be made in his image. Well, they kind of have an answer for that. But, I always had questions about, well, if I'm made in his image and so is a Chinese person and so is a white person, what is God? But also the whole idea that you are absolutely worthless was rammed down our throats, even in the songs that we sing. And one of them, I was laughing about it recently, wash me and I will be whiter than snow. I'm black. Sir, good sir, please. I do not want to be whiter than snow. How does that even make sense? So I had lots of questions about the theology, and I like church buildings. I like empty church buildings. It's when people get in it that I start to get itchy. But when I travel, I go to churches and I sit down and it feels amazing. And then the service starts and I just start to twitch because I'm like, it's quite triggering to hear some of the teachings. So I not only do I not go to church, I have completely rejected the theology of Christianity. It is fundamentally flawed. It hurts and harms more than it does good for me. For the good that it does in the world, it has done far more harm. It is violent, it is cruel, it's oppressive. It's the things that are done in God's name just makes me terrified of that God. Just before I bring you in, Sarah, I just wanted to say, I read a book last year which completely changed my life because I was always interested in African spirituality, and this is written by a shaman. But I did chuckle out loud when he said, so he was kidnapped by missionaries. Again, they're gone to Africa to spread the gospel, but they have to bring their brand of terror with them and completely destabilize communities. And he said, he was forced to learn about the white man's reality, which included lessons in history, geography, anatomy, mathematics, and literature. All of these topics were presented with a good dose of Christianity and his temperamental God, who forced everyone to live in constant fear of his wrath. That's pretty much how I experienced him. So, church for me no longer represents even the positives. It's a place I don't go back to willingly.
Before we bring Sarah in, can I just you've made some really, really, really interesting points, and I just wanted to kind of recap on a couple of them. So the hymn that you mentioned, I remember in school during assemblies, I don't know if Sarah, you remember these as well, being brought up in the UK, we sang those sorts of hymns as well. And I think for me, there is a clear distinction between the hymn and Christianity, because I think that the hymns were made by, I don't know, 18th century
white
old men who, with their own kind of idea. I'm not sure I don't know if that's the crux of Christianity, though. I think that's a white old man singing a hymn. And I also think that, yes, these people did use... Well, the reason why I say that is because I went to a Pentecostal church, and the hymns were very, very different to that.
Yeah.
And even more recently, I've gone to a church. The pastor happens to be a Nigerian man. And I love that. They're not hymns, they're that gospel music.
They're modern, contemporary Christian music. Yeah, those absolutely are okay.
And I love that. And there is none of this white as snow washing, and that is ridiculous,
Yeah.
But so then that's why, for me, there is a clear distinction between people and Christianity. I think people have, taken things out of the Bible. They have taken things out of context. For example, in the Bible, it clearly says something about, I'm not a scripture quoter, but something to the effect of, Jesus being of bronze skin with hair like wool, right? So even if, we're silly, let's just say,
he's not Norwegian with blonde hair.
He couldn't be, could he, right? Exactly. He can't be white, blonde, blue-eyed. It would be impossible. I think that's Michelangelo's interpretation. And what I'm saying is that, again, is that Christianity or is that people? That's what I'm trying. That's, for me, there's a clear distinction between people making what they will and the actual concept of Christianity itself. And I think people have used it to colonialize and to oppress and to enslave and to bring fear. Absolutely, yes, they have. But again, for me, that's people. That's what I would say.
That's people interpreting the scripture, or because I would dare you to go into any Caribbean household in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and even now some of them, where there isn't a picture of white Jesus hanging out and white angels and everything about heaven is white. And
isn't that to do with slavery, though? Isn't that to do with the fact that they did colonialize the Caribbean, and they, these are people interpreting the Bible for their own gain, isn't it? These are people who want to enslave a population of the world and therefore use whatever they could. I don't know if that is Christianity, though, or if that's
right.
just oppressors.
But they call it Christianity.
Yeah,
and they still cosplay and dress up in their robes and all sorts for high church, and it's what they would consider that Abrahamic Christianity. You would ask any Catholic or any of the major religions, Anglicans, for them, Christianity is exactly what it says it is in the Bible, whereas for me, it can't possibly be.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. It's just a really, really interesting topic. One last point. I was just going to say that my cousin in America calls himself a Black Jew, and there's a whole movement. There's a whole group of people who believe that they are Black Jews. And to be fair, Jews would have been Black.
Yeah.
Talking about, if you think about where in the world these people came from, they could not have been, the clear, the white Hasidic Jews that we know today. I think, but that to me is about history being taught inaccurately, and that the lack of honesty, really. And that is really used, that is racism. That is what's been used to oppress us.
Yeah.
All along, and continues to oppress us.
100%.
Anyway,
Sarah, what do you think?
Right. So I've got an interesting, I guess it's interesting to me anyway, history, my personal history with the church. So my mum grew up in quite a religious household. Her dad was actually a vicar, and my mum's sister is now a vicar. And my mum isn't particularly religious. My dad isn't religious, but her family were religious. And it's very kind of Vicar of Dibley Think about that. That's what they were like. They were like very much like it was the church hall. It was a cup of tea. It was a ginger nut biscuit if you're lucky, you know.
Wow.
And my auntie, she's lovely though. My auntie, she's really lovely. And when I kind of found the church and stuff, she was so happy. She said, "Oh, you found Jesus, and this is wonderful, wonderful." But she's very kind of stereotypical. It is a kind of woolly jumper on, and you know, feeding the baby a ginger nut while you have a cup of tea. It's that kind of thing. So we didn't really go to church much apart from Christmas. We went to church with like the village and stuff like that. So when I kind of got to about 2021, I was never an atheist, but I started on my spiritual journey. And as I mentioned in the previous podcast, I'm very spiritual. I do believe in God, but I guess this isn't about that. So when I got to about 2025, I went through all sorts of kind of, I don't know, rebellion, I guess, without saying too much on this podcast. I did all sorts of things I probably shouldn't have as a young person, young lady. And I was going through a bit of a tough time, and I was hanging around with the wrong crowd, basically. So I lived in Brixton at the time. And there was a pub where we used to go from a nightclub in the Fridge in central Brixton. We used to go up that Brixton Hill to this pub called the George IV. Now, just next to George IV was Ruach, the massive big church. The bishop is Ghanaian, and I'd say most of the congregation are black. So we'd walk past the church. I'd walk past the church every Sunday morning. They'd all be going, all they're dressed up or going to the service. And I'd be going, you know, to drink like a snake bite at a pub down there on a Sunday morning. Disgusting, actually. But anyway, so I got bored of this crowd of people I was hanging out with, and I kept walking past the church, and the music sounded really good. And I thought, what would happen actually if I one day actually went into that church? Because I'm starting to get sick of the people in the pub next door. And I think for me, even though I wasn't religious as such at the time, I wasn't an atheist either, and I needed something. So I've forgotten what happened, but anyway, somehow I ended up actually going into the church. Rather than going out with them, I actually went into Ruach, and because it was near where I lived as well, because I also lived in Brixton Hill, so I went into Ruach, and that was life-changing for me. It really was. I went on my own. I always went on my own, and I'd go each week, and that is the way I got out of that group of people. And after that, my life just changed for the better. The church itself was very vibrant. It was nothing like my auntie's church. It wasn't about, you know, washing as white as snow, any of that jazz. It was more like what you said, Karen, about your experience with the Nigerian church. Really vibrant, great songs. They weren't hymns about, you know, marching out to war and all that crap. Sorry, but it wasn't. The only thing that I found a little bit like, was the whole tithe and stuff. So obviously I knew from my auntie, you give a little bit. But with my auntie's church, someone might give like £1.50 or whatever's in their purse for tithe. That was it. Whatever change you had, you go round and give. So when I went to Ruach, it was eye-opening, put it that way. So I'd go along, and people would be, you know, it was a bit like I spoke to Karen before. It was a kind of a show. I mean, the bishop was very kind of showy, and they'd say a bit like I said to Karen, she said that the bishop had come back from Lagos. I mean, this bishop would be coming back from Accra, and he'd be kind of flying in, then he'd be another church going out there. So it was all a big kind of performance, and he'd have these kind of prophets in, and these prophets would always come in. But one thing I noticed, and I will say this, and I want to say that SPAC Nation and all that, the prophets he got in were all incredibly good looking and young. I'm thinking, what? They were all very good looking, young, incredibly well dressed. Sorry, Kay?
Were they all male?
Yes.
Ah, interesting.
All male. And then they'd come in and they'd be like, that's it, you know, I've just had a word of God. And everyone would literally fall at their feet. People would fall at their feet. People were falling over so much. It was like, you know, those, I'm sorry to be disrespectful, people, if you fall prophets' feet, but you know those zombie movies when everyone's just falling over, the zombies all falling over each other. That's what it was like. And they were falling at the feet of the prophet, but people almost getting stamped over. I remember that. And that was being like, I was quite surprised about that. And then another thing I was surprised about was when the money, I remember one person said they're pledging to give £1,000. I thought, wow, a check, because back in those days you have like a check for £1,000. And I was thinking, wow. And that was normal. The bishop's like, yeah, that was normal. And then obviously that part of my life, I didn't end up continuing going on to Ruach, because it got to the point actually where there was some guys, they kept, when I went to the service, after the service, they kept coming out and trying to chat me up. And I found that really, I didn't go there for that. I went there for my own almost like my own mental health almost. It was therapeutic for me to go there. And it was about me finding myself and removing myself from toxic people so I could step into another part of my life. And I came out of the church with my little paper thing of the service, and the guys were just talking to me and saying, oh, I saw you last week. It just put me right off. And then I'd see the same guy in Brixton, he'd say, I haven't seen you in church last week. It really annoyed me. So I stopped going. I think probably because of him, really maybe the creeps, that guy. So yeah, I stopped going to Ruach, but it really did create a turning point for me in my life. Recently, last 2 years, I have seen a lot of the stuff going on with SPAC Nation, a lot of scamming going on in the church, poor young people giving all their money to the church, getting in huge amounts of debt. And I just think it's just been used to it's been used for fraud. So I think that the church has been kind of, I don't know, used and abused a little bit as well. But all in all, I found it a really positive experience. Would I go back there now? Maybe, if I went with my partner or something. His family are quite religious, maybe, but I can't see myself going back there every Sunday, because to me it feels too rigid. What I've experienced in my life now spiritually, I just couldn't go and sit in a church and think this is it. That's it's not me. Everybody else, anyone can do what the heck they like, but it's just not me. But it was useful for a time. So yeah, that's my experience, ladies.
That's really interesting, Sarah. And what I found particularly interesting was when you talked about a particular time in your life when you felt, you didn't actually use the word lost, you didn't say that, but you just felt
I was lost,
okay,
I think.
All right. Okay, so that's a good term to use then. Perhaps you were a bit lost and you felt like you needed to kind of be grounded, find yourself again. You kind of found yourself doing things that you perhaps shouldn't have been, as you said. So I think for a lot of people, church can be quite grounding, because I think what I like about church is that it helps me to look outside of myself. It allows me to be less selfish, think about people who are less fortunate than myself. It makes me think about something greater than me, because I think fundamentally human beings can be quite selfish, right? So
I agree. Yeah.
That's what I found. It was quite grounding for me. But I feel as if I've never quite found the right denomination for myself. I think that's a lot to do with it. So, for example, I went to a church very similar to your experience. And like I say, this pastor was Nigerian, and he would, he literally, like his wife would be at the pulpit and she'd say, oh, I'm just waiting for my husband, his plane's just landing, things like that,
Wow.
I've just got to, and he's coming in from, like you say, Lagos or wherever they were coming in from. And then he'd get there. But the thing is, he was very charismatic. And I actually went to listen to his sermons because they were that good.
Yeah, they are good.
He was I don't know, really. I guess it's like being an actor. He was a performer in a way. And he was very talented, extreme. And I used to leave the service feeling really energized and rejuvenated. And I felt good, like it set me up for the week, right? So there was that. But the flip side of that is that afterwards he'd say things like, I've just published my new book. Please come and, if you'd like me to sign your, come for the book signing and things like that. It felt a little bit celebrity for me, for church, right? So there was that. And also it was so huge, you really didn't know anyone. Like I'd be sat next to somebody I've never met. And if I came out next week, I'd never see them because it was huge. I mean, the congregation was ridiculous. I don't know, maybe 1,000 or more people sat in that hall. But what I did love was the way they worshipped through song and music. I mean, their choir and acoustics and the instruments and the band, those American evangelical,
that's what mine was like, Karen. They'd all be singing and dancing, I think gospel,
and they live stream each service.
Yeah.
You can watch it back on YouTube. I remember the first time I went, he said, here's a copy of the service. You can watch that back. I was like, oh my goodness. So it's very, very grand. And the other thing I was going to say about, tithe, right? So they came around and they were like, oh, if you'd like to put your bank details here, you can do it by standing order. I was like, I was like £2.50 in my purse. I was ready to like rock out. And they were like, well, if you would. And so what I think for me, that was slightly off-putting. However, it's such a big church that what they had there on site, you had a children's playground, you had an extensive Sunday school. So you had every age. So you might have like 4s and 5s, 6s and 7s. I mean, they could divide it up.
Wow.
Into ages, different ages, because they felt that children learn differently depending on age and stage. So they made it almost like a community in itself. They were thinking about getting some sort of movie theater equipment so that they could have, or like a bowling alley they wanted to get, so that you could literally spend all of your leisure time on site. And I think the purpose of that is so that families want to raise their children in the church and how they want to raise them, and therefore the less contact they had with sort of the outside world, the better. And therefore
that worries me though, Karen. That worries me.
Yes, I'm coming to that. But what I'm saying is, in terms of tithe, I think people, if that's how you want to live, you are willing to pay for a lifestyle. It would be, I suppose, the equivalent of me wanting to go to whatever rave I might want to go to at the weekend, because that's how I want to spend my time. For these people, I'm guessing that's how they spent, not only, it wasn't just church, it was their life. Also, in addition to that, I was just going to mention that when I went to an Anglican church, I think Anglican churches, correct me if I'm wrong, are funded quite heavily by public funds. Whereas I think they used to. I think there is a certain amount of, because that's why, so I can't remember what century it was, but there was a particular time when lots and lots of churches were built. So you've got quite a few, like Anglican and sort of Catholic churches.
Oh, like my auntie's one, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those sorts of churches. Yes,
it's very different, totally different.
Yeah, but they are state run, because England used to be a Christian country, right? So it's somewhat funded by the state, whereas these I call them pop-up churches that are run primarily by African pastors, etc., are privately run. So I don't know how. I think they are a charity, therefore I don't know how they make their money, but it's not in the same way. So they
make their money from the congregation. That's how they make their money.
Yeah, and for me, is it how I want to spend my? I think it was 5%. They were asking for 5% of your salary.
The church I grew up in was 10% tithe. I used to tithe. I tithe religiously. I just asked today in my family group chat, can I get a refund, please? Because I tithe for years. And the churches, it was 10% off your net, but some churches were asking for 10% of your gross pay. Yes, wow. I kid you not. They were like, God is going to replace it. No, he did not. No, the debt and the nonsense I put myself in. But Karen, just to bring your point back on tithing. So recently, I don't know if you heard Creflo Dollar, which is a huge American televangelist, very much of the prosperity gospel era. He came out recently and apologized for the teaching on tithing and said it's wrong. And another one as well. But, his net worth is 27 million. So is he going to give back any of that? No. They just want to come out and say it was wrong. We shouldn't have taught it. But they're keeping their private jets and they're keeping the luxurious lifestyle, whilst the people who are tithing are living hand to mouth and sometimes don't even know how they're going to eat.
Well, that's why I think, so this brings us to our next point, right? The thing is, I think as a human being and as a person of sound mind, you have to be able to separate your own views from what pastor says, right? So I know people who religiously go by whatever pastor says, that goes. That's when I think it almost becomes a cult, because it's like people have lost their ability to use their own judgment, to be sort of,
That's what they did though, Karen. That's what they did in SPAC Nation. I'm not sure you know about that, Karen. That's exactly what they did.
I've heard about them,
Toby Adeboyega did. Sorry, but he did. He took young people that were vulnerable and better, and he exploited them, and he got gang members to kind of exploit them, and he made huge amounts of money, and now it's got shut down, but they're still operating.
Yeah. But they tie that in with the fear, Sarah, as well. That it's one thing is the fear that if you don't do it, you're not going to get God's blessings. Literally, that's the teaching. If you do not tithe, God will not bless you. Who doesn't want God's blessings? So it's a cruel thing.
For me, it was when I was at church, it wasn't taught to me or told to me as not receiving God's blessings. What they said was, in order for this to run, because another church I went to was a bit like your auntie's Vicar of Dibley. It was an Anglican church, Church of England. And they just talked about the fact that, although the government do subsidise us, we can't run this without your contributions. That's how they... And nobody was living lavishly. The pastor lived on site in a little annex.
That's right.
Drove a little modest car. And it's a completely different thing, if I'm honest. And for those priests or vicars or pastors, what you call them, they've actually got to go to some sort of,
Yes, she did. She got trained. Took years and years of training, and she but she was very proud of it. When she qualified, whatever it is, not she's qualification, but she was very, very proud of it. The family were very proud of her, and pictures were taken and stuff.
It's a completely different thing.
Whereas some churches, you make money for the church, suddenly you become a pastor.
Yeah.
Yes. No training. Yes.
And I think that's another significant difference. And so I've been to churches where, some guy who was perhaps the deacon or the second man, or he's decided that he wants a church. All these little spin-off churches popping up.
Loads of them, fellowships.
And that's where I try to be very careful. Again, for me, there's a separation between church and people. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, people run these churches, right? So churches are institutions, but they are run by people. And unfortunately, some people are corrupt.
Some people are full of crap. I could tell you all sorts. Some of the preaching I've heard, I could literally go and do a pop-up church right now in Brixton. Of
course you could.
And I could talk to you about all sorts of crap in Jesus' name. And there's people that will come and listen to my rambles.
Yeah.
Because as long as you talk, if that's the same in life, you can talk a load of old rubbish in life, but if you talk with a confident manner, everyone thinks you're the shit.
Yeah.
And if you leave a bit of truth in it, my goodness, with our background and training.
It's true though. Drop a few bits and bobs. I don't know the Bible at all, but I tell you, if I can pull out 3 things of the Bible, I'm very good at waffling. I can waffle for you for an hour, and I can drop those 3 Bible bits in, and suddenly, before you know it, everyone's going, yes, yes, yes.
That's
and you've got to remember, people who are vulnerable and looking for something to kind of keep them, like you say, you felt lost.
Yeah, I did.
People are easy targets sometimes, and that's the thing I don't like about it. But again, I think that's people making decisions to run churches very, very badly. The other thing I would say is that I have a family member who is, I know a few people, but this particular person is very, very led by church. She kind of broke away somewhat from the family and really does everything by what pastor says. Do you know what I mean? I love that she's happy, and I love that she seems to have found what makes her happy and it works for her family. However, it doesn't sit easy, comfortably with me when it's pastor's decision. So many things that I think should be really your decision. Or things like, they don't watch the TV. I mean, to be fair, on the TV, there's a lot of crap, let's face it.
Yeah.
But I think I was talking to my youngest daughter about this, actually, and she was saying to me, when families are like that and they remove their children from everything from the world and it's all about church, you can't watch TV, no social media, they can't do this, can't do that. She says, actually, when they go to university in places like that, Mum, for an interview, for example, some of these young people will really struggle because they will be so inexposed to everything. They won't have, not familiar with pop culture. Obviously, the internet can be a grave place also, and you do need to protect your children. However, removing your kids from everything and everything is just church, I think you are somewhat limiting your children, really.
Definitely.
And indoctrinating them. So they're really not equipped for the world. And I can speak on that because my whole life was church. You weren't allowed to have friends who weren't of the same denomination as you because you're not supposed to be of the world. You couldn't, we couldn't dance, we couldn't drink, we couldn't wear jewelry, we couldn't wear makeup, you couldn't style your hair a certain way. I mean, it was ridiculous. And we always used to joke and say, when they leave, they break out like a sore foot. Yeah. Because it is the rebellion, the pushback is incredible. Because that's not real life. You can't live like that.
It's a bit like being like a what's that, a Quaker, isn't it? Or
I wouldn't even say Quakers. I like that.
Jehovah's Witness. I've worked with a lot of Jehovah's Witness young girls, and all the stuff Kay just said. Often that's the same. They were not allowed to be friends with people that are not in the religion. You know, they have to, you know, be a certain way, dress a certain way, no makeup. You know, it's just they're very, very boxed in to the point where if something does happen, which I had with one client, the client didn't even know what was going on, because the issue was taken to the elders before it was even taken to the police.
And so of course, the purity culture, Sarah, I imagine that is something of a sexual nature, because they teach purity culture so heavily as it is the only way to get a good husband. Nonsense. But you don't own your body. You never grow up thinking, this is my body, I can make choices about who I share it with. No. So when you say this is God's representative on earth, the pastor, and you should obey because he's of God, and then he wants to sexually abuse you, they've already done the groundwork.
There was that thing on Netflix, wasn't there? There was that thing on Netflix about that.
I watched it.
You eat, sleep, pray, and obey, or something like that. Eat, sleep, what's it called? Yeah, that one.
That was a cult, wasn't it? That was just some crazy man who was insane.
He was abusing that, but which version of crazy are we serving? Let's face it. You know, all of it has a little bit of crazy.
It does, but the thing is, and if someone just wants to go by the word of pastor, that to me, I think that's a bit because that's a man. That's a word of one man. He is not God.
But they don't believe he's just a man. They believe he's divinely ordained and chosen by God, so he's special.
But you can't, I can't understand so whatever he says, if he says, right, you must give your entire wages and sacrifice your own family, then you'll do it because he said so.
Yeah, because he will tell you God is going to bless you tenfold. So you give me your wages of £1,500, you're going to get back about 5, 6. In fact, you're going to get back so much money you won't have room enough to receive it. That's literally a scripture.
I can understand that in a place where there's no other references to life, and I can understand that back at years and years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, when people feared, like, oh, what's coming down from the sky? I can understand that then, but the world we live in now, I think in let's just say in Western culture, because I can't talk about other culture. In the Western culture, I can't understand how people can think that, because what about their own families? What about their own thoughts? You give all your thoughts to one man. I just don't understand that at all. I think
but that's vulnerability again, isn't it? He's catching people who are vulnerable, people who, perhaps lost. I mean, it's like anything, isn't it? It's like people falling prey to drugs or
everything. Yeah,
it's you know what I mean. It's people who they're lost, they're searching for something, and this man says, "I'll give you something. Come to me."
And that's what happened with Back Nation. But they were young, so I just find it sad when. I find it very sad when someone's young, but I can understand how they manipulate somebody who's young, and it's terrible. But you think by the time someone's like 40 or 50, you think by now, surely they're not going to forsake their whole families for a religion.
Yeah. No, because it has them in a chokehold, Sarah. And if you look back at the origin of this, the how on earth did the enslaved come to worship the God of the oppressor to the point that they believed this God was going to save them? You think about that dissonance, that the God who you worshipped on Sunday on your one day off was okay with you being enslaved and raped and beaten till your skin peeled off, with the horrors that were visited on our people. And then on Sunday, we are all worshiping the same God. How? And then the idea, I think this is one of my biggest issues with religion or any kind of Christian teaching, is that the oppressed will get our reward in heaven. Who's been there to come back and tell me that that's what happened? Nobody. So on the earth, the oppressor lives the most luxurious life. They have the wealth, they have the power. And the oppressed should pray to this same God. And then when they die, they'll get their reward. Well, what use is it to me? I'm dead.
Yeah, I agree.
But so for me, it's a chokehold. Religion on Black people is a chokehold unless we move past the idea that the same God that says it's okay to enslave us is now coming back to save us. But we will always fall prey to these kind of teachings.
But Kay, can I ask a question about that? So the people who are enslaving Black people, they're doing a very, very, very bad thing, aren't they? Right? But what they did was they tried to spin it to say that they were doing the right thing, but that's not Christianity. That's them, very, very bad people doing a bad thing.
No,
using the Bible
that's
to
the
justify
version.
what they're saying.
You could say that, and I know my mum would say that too. But
I can't see how anything in the Bible says thou shalt repress Black people and enslave. It doesn't say that.
But the slave Bible, they took out all the references to freedom and said God said it was okay to have slaves.
That's what I'm saying. People have done that. People, what they've done is they've taken out things out of context to fit their purpose. That's what I'm saying. Do you know what I mean? So this is.
But does this God really exist? Does the Christian God really exist?
All right, that's a separate thing altogether. But what I'm saying is, when we're talking about Christianity, what I'm saying to you is that these people who were committing evil, right, and the most heinous crimes, used the Bible for their own good.
The church signed off on it, Karen. It's not even as simple as that. The Catholic Church gave the go-ahead for in God's name to go and do this to these people who have 3/5 of a soul, so they're not fully human. And
I agree with you. So
I can't separate the church from slavery because the church condoned it, signed off on it, said it was okay.
I completely understand. But is that the same as the Bible then? If the Bible was written all this time before, is the Bible not, well, to be fair, the Bible's questionable as well, but I'm trying to separate.
The Bible was written by men.
Yeah, that is true.
Wrote it in a way that allowed them to do I was going to swear, I shall not, but allowed them to carry out their supremacist violence. And the original text of the Bible, I don't know that we will ever even come across that in our lifetimes. Because it's been changed so many times.
That is another thing. That is another thing I was going to come to. That is the point. That it's been changed so many times to fit the oppressor.
Exactly.
That's my point, I think. Because to me, I imagine that Jesus was a very Black man who walked the earth, if there was a Jesus. That's what I would believe. And I don't believe what the oppressors, I don't believe in their indoctrination. I don't believe in what was sold to us was wrong, and it was so that they could enslave us. I just don't know. I'm just trying to think if there's a separation between what God is and if there was a Jesus and what people made it into when we look at what church is today. Because I know what you mean, and you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. The church is to blame for slavery. You are right. The
theology hasn't changed either, Karen. The theology is the same. It's the same formula. Take something, oppress people, harm them, and then promise them a future of freedom and riches and unimaginable wealth when they die. That formula has worked and keeps on working, and it might change. Its shape shifts a little bit to adjust to the current times.
That's what it's called. It's fraud.
Fraud.
It's Toby Adeboyega. That's what it is.
Yes, that's it. You're right, Sarah. It is fraud because those people who they have fleeced are still poor, are still suffering, are still struggling while they're living off the fat of the land. So the theology hasn't changed, Karen. Not since.
I'm just thinking, like, my personal experience of when I went to this Pentecostal church as a kid, right? Yeah. I'm thinking about that pastor. So he wasn't a Nigerian swindler. Sorry, I'm not trying to associate Nigerians with swindling fraud. I'm sorry for that connection. However, but he wasn't, right? And it was a happy place. And I can't think back and remember that anyone was sort of coerced and doing anything they didn't want to do, that the tithe was inappropriate or was excessive. Yeah, I just think that church at the time was, I would say, maybe one of the healthiest examples I've seen. So because we're looking at extremities, aren't we? We're looking at extreme experiences. So I don't know. But yes, you're right. Christianity itself is flawed. There are lots of things I don't understand about it. I mean, for example, it says you can only be saved if you accept Jesus. So if I lived in a kibbutz in the middle of, I don't know, the Outer Hebrides, would I go to hell because I haven't been introduced to Jesus? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah.
So there's some things that,
it's too for Westerns, I understand society it's not Western. I've been some places as well, and I can understand how they would embrace the church. I can. But I think sitting here in Kent, I think it's very, very rigid to live that kind of life here in Kent. I just can't see how you could actually live obviously you go to church and enjoy church if you wanted to, but you couldn't live a life fully of just only church. It'd be very hard to do that.
Many do. And I tell you something, Karen, that church you talked about where you had such a positive experience and still find it quite a healthy experience of church. I'm telling you now, the theology would still look something like poverty, suffering for the cause of Christ is your portion. I promise you that. That's the cornerstone of every doctrine. You're to suffer for the cause of Christ. And if you're not suffering, then are you even godly? But those who are teaching it.
Very true.
I do understand what you're saying, and I think there is that. I have heard that side, but also when I went to this one in Kent, this huge one I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
he talked about prosperity. He talked about being to be prosperous, to earn, to be comfortable, to be fruitful. I mean, we at the end of the service, he'd get us to like exchange business cards because he'd say, we want to patronize each other's businesses. And I liked that. I thought it was really healthy. So he talked a lot about wealth. And I remember saying to somebody in the congregation, I was like, that's quite different to what I'd always been taught prior to that. And they said, no, think about it. You can't help other people if you don't have yourself. You can't pour from an empty jug. Therefore, you should be comfortable and secure financially yourself. And therefore, then you can help other people. I thought, I like that.
I agree.
Okay.
It still sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme. Because
as long as there's no money, involved. No, as long as we'll help you with business. Otherwise, you get into the whole thing again. We'll help you know someone or mentor you. They don't exist. Hint, hint. Well,
I think it was literally just trying to encourage and support each other's businesses. So, like, say for example, if I went and I said, I'm I tutor for the 11 plus. Here's my card. If your children are entering year 5 and 6, please call me. That kind of thing.
That's fine if it ends there, Karen. That's fine if it ends there.
Yeah.
It was. That's literally what it's like. And then somebody might be a carpenter, a handyman. You might say, here's my business card. I can put your IKEA shelving up, or I don't know, whatever it was. Yeah. But I like that. I like the networking around that.
Yeah. But don't think that won't still rip you off, because I've had friends whose experience that was. Where they think, let me support a church brother or sister's business and get the most appalling service, but they should suck it up because God.
No, it's worrying. It is this. I had this client actually that before that, actually, I asked her about what she felt about people that had made money from their own businesses legitimately and worked their way up from the bottom up. And she says she can't, she wants to be wealthy, but at the same time, she looks at people that are wealthy that have made their own money and thinks they can't be of God. I thought, wow.
So I had that ideas too.
You shot yourself in the foot there, haven't you, really, then?
That's what I meant, the poverty. For religion to carry on, for the church to carry on, it needs poor people, because you're not finding a lot of rich people in church. You just...
Mind you, I have to say, when I went to this church that was Anglican, right? A bit like your Vicar of Dibley church. Everybody was very, very affluent. I remember them giving a sermon about, making sure you pay your taxes on time. But I thought it's right for you to say, and standing in the pulpit with your cardigan on. Or
quiet, though, those churches. Very quiet. The services
They're very, very quiet. It's very Puritan, isn't it? It's very Puritan. Thou shalt not dance, not make too much noise.
They kneel down on those little tiny little cushions.
Yes.
Have a little hymn book.
Yeah, and you have your bread.
Yeah.
And you say the same prayers every week.
All
you read the same prayers.
But what I'm saying is that church, the congregation there were actually very, very elderly, very, very.
Always are, aren't they? Always elderly.
And, and very, very comfortable actually in their lovely houses in Darland Banks.
Yeah, that's what it is. That is. That's why it's a ginger nut biscuit for the baby and a cup of tea. Come on, it was very orderly. you know.
But what I'm saying is that's quite different to what Kay's saying about being poor. These people were not poor. They were not poor. They were very, very comfortable.
But what color were they?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're saying there's a separation between black church.
Yeah, everyone was white. Everyone is always in those Anglican.
The generational wealth from slavery went to white people.
Of course. Yeah.
You remember they got reparations. The enslaved didn't. So they have generational wealth running through their families and houses in Darling Banks because it would have been passed down.
Absolutely.
So you go to the majority black church, you're not going to see that kind of wealth, or even generationally that kind of wealth. You just won't.
No. Well, no, that's representational of society, though, isn't it? Because
exactly, because black people are still waiting for white God to come and save them.
That's a whole nother podcast.
And that's a whole nother podcast.
Ladies, we're going to wrap it up. Very interesting discussion. We could talk all night about this, couldn't we?
We could.
And it'd be really interesting to hear what viewers have to say about this particular topic.
Definitely.
So if you have any interesting comments, or if you just want to comment about today's episode, please do email us at ladies. I never remember.
Beautifully Melanated podcast at gmail.com.
Thank you.
Or Instagram at Beautifully Melanated.
All right, guys. It's been great chatting to you, and we will see you all later.
See you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
We are beautifully.